I mean, think about it. What have you been asked about more in your Christian life? Whether or not you came to church on Sunday, or has somebody asked, hey, how's your evangelism going? Boils down to leadership. Ambitious people follow ambitious leaders. Passive people follow passive leaders. It's just the way that it is. Right? I met a brother who, he didn't go to my church, but nonetheless, he was a believer. And he goes, you moving to California? And I said, yeah. He goes, why would you want to move to a place with all those God-hating Democrats?
Yeah, interesting.
And I thought to myself, wow, that is like a very unrealistic stereotype. Okay. But my response to him was this, even if that is true, what a great opportunity for the gospel, right? So if all you focus on is mental health and drug addiction, it's really a Band-Aid solution, not really addressing the core issue. You say, well, what's the core issue? It's the breakdown of the family. The answer can't just be, well, it's the government's job to solve it. There has to be this uniting of the public and private sector. But it is time for the people of God and for people who value family to stand up and rise, and to be bold and to be courageous and to prayerfully consider, what can I actively do to make these kinds of changes happen? The darkness doesn't want the light, right? And so the world should feel threatened by the church lovingly going into the world and presenting Christ. That's what I'm talking about.
Welcome to The Whole Steward, the holistic approach to wealth from a Christian worldview. I'm your host, Andrew Stanton, and I'm glad you've joined. Stewardship is about doing what's best, or what you believe to be best, with what God has given you. All 9 forms of capital. Part of that comes with a lot of ambition and goal setting, and I love being in the presence with people who have ambitious goals. Today, I sit down with my friend Brandon Jones, who's running for governor of California. Today on The Whole Steward. Well, this is episode number 65. I'm glad you've joined. Like I said, setting goals and working towards them can be a form of stewardship. Well, it is stewardship. And we've talked many times about the 9 forms of capital. California is a state with many different natural resources and political and people-oriented, societal-oriented issues. And my friend, Brandon Jones, is a very ambitious guy, successful in the business world, a strong believer in Jesus Christ, our Lord, and is running for governor. What an amazing thing. So I sit down with him today and ask him why. How did he get there? What motivates him? And we dive into some policy questions and some interesting conversation. I think you'll enjoy how he arrived at that point, and I hope you really enjoy and get some insight and want to learn more about his run for governor. So this is my conversation with Brandon Jones. All right, our next guest is Brandon Jones, a friend of mine. We met at church, actually, and
yeah, that's right.
I have wanted to get you on the podcast for a while now. I think your history is super cool, and you do some exciting stuff. Like, a lot has changed even since I wanted to get you on the podcast, so we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah.
Some big aspirations. But to start out, I would like to hear a little bit, for our listeners, where you came from, how you got here. You have a business background, and obviously being a believer. All those things are super interesting to me. So a little bit of history.
Yeah, sure. So grew up in Iowa, small town in Iowa, just south of Des Moines, a place called Indianola. It's about 12,000 people when I grew up there. And lived there my whole life. Virtually, didn't really venture outside of Iowa a whole lot. I think we took a few family vacations out of state. But I graduated high school. I actually wanted to be a Navy SEAL. So I got a Navy SEAL contract, went into the Navy. That didn't work out. So I didn't pass all the tests they put you through. But it was still a good experience nonetheless. But so after the military, I kind of bounced around a little bit, had a few jobs, went to a few different schools, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I had I don't know where the idea originally came from, but I developed the idea to pursue a career in the movie industry.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I began to research the industry and Hollywood and that kind of thing. Now, mind you, I'm 19 years old at this point. Didn't know the Lord, and but that was what I wanted to do. So I had a bartending job at this time. So I would have been 21, actually. And a young lady I was bartending with, and I was telling her my dream of making it to Hollywood and that kind of thing. And she goes, "Well, I went to an acting school in Hollywood over the summer a few years back. You should check it out." So I researched the school and applied and got in. And so I moved to Hollywood at 21. This would have been shortly after 9/11. And now mind you, I went from Iowa to West Hollywood. So talk about a culture shock, right?
Wow.
And so I went to acting school. I did acting for, I went through training for about 3 years and did a number of theater performances and short films, and I did a few feature films. Nothing that would have made like theaters or anything, but did that gig for a while and realized very quickly that it usually didn't pay anything. So I needed a way to support myself.
So what do you have to become like a big time actor to make a lot of money, or what?
Yeah, I mean,
what do you mean it didn't pay?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things, especially for actors that are starting out, I mean, you're going to take whatever you can get to build up what they call a demo reel. Okay. And so you're pitching your demo reel then to get bigger and better gigs. But yeah, along the way, it's really tough. They talk about the starving actor. That's a thing. Okay. And it's real. I mean, living on ramen and peanut butter and that kind of thing. And but yeah, a lot of the gigs you're getting, a lot of young actors that are starting out, they're going to do a lot of like student films. So you have like students in film schools, and they got to do, short films for their school projects, and so they're hiring, aspiring actors, but they're just paying them in food.
Kind of sounds similar to when I was pursuing a pilot career.
Oh yeah, okay.
You got to work your way up in the airlines.
Yeah.
And my instructor was telling me like, oh, you start out with nothing. Like you'll make like $18K a year. I'm like, $18K a year? What are you gonna do with that? Well, it won't matter because you'll either be flying or sleeping, and you'll never see anybody until you work your way up. So I was like, yeah, okay, I need like a real job, but
yeah,
you got to get up to the top before you make any like real money, I guess.
Yeah, and I imagine if you get enough name recognition, you could do like regional commercials and find gigs that may pay enough to eke out a living in Los Angeles. But it's
so you were never going to be like a John Wayne or
well, that's what I hoped, right? That's what I hoped. Okay. But yeah, as the Lord would have it, I obviously needed something to do on the side to help pay the bills and whatnot, and so I found a company that sent entertainers to private parties, like birthday parties and church events and community events, and I'm like, well, that's perfect.
So like stand-up entertainment, or
not stand-up, where I would either go as like a clown, or I would dress up like as a character, and do do like face painting and that kind of thing.
Okay.
And so I did that, and it paid pretty well, and so that really helped me as I was trying to pursue this career in acting. But after a while, it fizzled out. I'm like, I'm really getting burnt out. This isn't going anywhere, and so I began to think, I'm doing these kids gigs, and I'm like, this could become a business. And so, I turned it into a business. And so that was my first company. I started that at the age of 24, and it was called Galaxy Entertainment. Oh, wow. And it really took off.
Did you ever find, like, when you were in school that you were bored, or, just your mind was elsewhere?
Like college?
Well, college or even elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
People with business minds often are like distracted from what you're supposed to do. Fall in line with, following instructions or whatever. You're kind of falling into, a business. Yeah. But it seems like usually that sort of inclination sometimes can start earlier.
Oh, it definitely started earlier. Yeah, even ever since I was a kid, I was always involved in, entrepreneurial activity. Okay. Yeah, so that was always there, and I think the kids' parties just really provided the first viable opportunity for me to be a full-fledged entrepreneur. Interesting. And Yeah.
So what does being an entrepreneur mean to you? What does that mean?
Well, I mean, I think it's somebody who's willing to go down the path of owning their own business and all that comes with, and whether that business is a part-time business or something that you have to fully provide for yourself. But I think it starts with a certain mindset too, a certain way that you view business in general, right? So, for me, I never felt, and I've had jobs along the way too, but I never really felt comfortable working for someone else. I was always willing to do it, and I was always thankful for the opportunities that came my way, but I always felt that I was much better geared toward being an entrepreneur and running my own business.
So what is it that working for somebody else versus running your own business, why, basically?
Well, I think running your own business really gives you, I guess I'll call it the creative liberty to make it what you want. And obviously, and you can have, in a sense, a job where you have that liberty to kind of create your own role within an organization. I get that, but it's not the same kind of untethered sort of freedom that you have when you're an entrepreneur.
So I've heard business owners or also employees, push back on the concept and say, well, no, if you own your own business, you still answer to somebody, you answer to your customers.
Yeah.
So, I've heard some people say, oh, customer's not always right.
Right.
But, you still answer to somebody.
Sure.
Right. As a business owner. So who, in your view, do you feel like you answer to?
Well, certainly as an entrepreneur, you're going to answer to your clients. So just like as an employee, to answer to a boss. But again, it goes back to the freedom element, right? Yeah. As an entrepreneur, you have a choice as to whether you take on a client or not, right? As an employee, understandably, you don't have that choice to say, I'm not going to do this or I'm going to do these things.
Well, the employee could switch jobs.
You could. Yeah, but then you're back into another situation where you don't have the same level of freedom that an entrepreneur would.
So maybe what you're getting at is that you're more of a visionary that sees like, hey, if I was going to approach this particular problem, I want control over how I approach it. And anytime if you're working for somebody else, they might have a little bit different view. Now, if you're doing a good job in that position, you're bringing the company to a good place, whoever your boss is probably going to be like, hey, Brandon, you get full reign. Take this where you want to, right?
Right.
But with your own business, you're going to, by default have that ability. Hey, we're not going to focus here, we're going to focus here. And don't answer to anybody else at that point unless you're in, like a tight financial situation or something, and we have to serve these clients versus these. But
right.
It's that visionary aspect.
Yeah, it's the visionary aspect, and part of it is the freedom to decide how you're going to solve problems. But I think there's also another component to it is you can decide which opportunities that you're going to pursue, right? And so it's really you have different flavors of entrepreneurs as well. You have the guy that maybe by trade he's a plumber, right? Like that's his gig, that's his jam, and he just decides to be self-employed. Okay. For me, it was never like this specific thing that I sort of wrapped a business around. If I saw an opportunity, no matter what it was,
being a clown,
right? Or, pursuing real estate or whatever it was, that I had the freedom to say, okay, I see an opportunity here. I'm going to seize that opportunity. And I think that was the kind of freedom that I had more of a bent toward as opposed to, being an employee where I didn't necessarily have that freedom.
So did you jump straight from being a clown into real estate?
Yeah, kind of. The real estate was happened kind of by accident. I realize there's no true accidents, but for lack of a better word,
accidental landlord.
Yeah, so I had been doing the real estate or the kids party business for about a decade, and it had grown.
Did you have employees and everything?
No employees. They were all contractors because they were all part-time entertainers. Okay. But we had them. We went statewide, and then we went into Texas and Illinois and multiple states. But and I got to a point where I wasn't doing parties myself, but it was a 7-day-a-week thing because there's so many logistical things that are going on, and no matter how organized and efficient you are, things are just going to go wrong. And so I always had to be on call. And so after I got married and we had our first son, he was 1 or 2 at the time, and we had moved out of California and we were living in Texas. And I remember I looked at him one day and I thought to myself, if I don't get out of this business, this kid's going to grow up with no father, right? Because I can never step away from this business. I worked 7 days a week for over 10 years, and so for me, that was a very...
You a believer at the time?
I was, yeah. And so that was part of it too. That also, weighed heavily on my heart, just all the time that was required for that business. It worked well when I was single. It began not to work so well when I was married with kids. My wife was very gracious and giving me the time I needed to focus on the company. But so I began to look for the next thing. I had an interest in real estate, I was watching those real estate shows, and you kind of get hooked on the dream that they present. And living in Texas, my dad was in Missouri. My dad was in construction his whole life, and every now and then he would find a fixer-upper himself and fix it up and flip it. And I remember talking to him one day, and he had this little 2-bedroom house in Springfield that he had fixed up, and he just was having a hard time selling it. And I said, hey, send me some pictures. I looked at the pictures. It was an adorable little, tiny house, like 500 square feet. And I wanted to get into real estate, and I said, Dad, I'll buy that from you. And so he sold it to me, and that became my first rental property, and then I was hooked, and then the real estate game was on.
He had fixed it already?
He had fixed it already.
You bought
it was a turnkey.
Fully renovated?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I didn't get out of kids' parties immediately, but real estate and then marketing sort of started happening at the same time. And then within a few years, I was at a kids' party. I actually sold the kids' party company to one of my entertainers. Yeah, and got out of it. So yeah. So interesting journey, man.
Yeah, you then I've talked to you more about the real estate part of it. Mm-hmm. The kids' parties is super interesting. Going from clown to real estate. Yeah. Just really quick on the real estate, you grew that business pretty big as well, correct?
Yeah, probably scaled that one too fast. So now at this time, this was this was probably 4 or 5 years before COVID.
Okay.
The real estate market in Springfield was hot, and when I say hot, I mean there were literally just properties sitting around everywhere. Many of them had been on the market for a long time, so the prices were reduced. And for whatever reason, a lot of investors hadn't entered that particular market. And so when I began to see the opportunity there, again, looking for the opportunity, I began to realize, there's a lot of properties to be had. And so I began buying them and took on a partner. And so, now we had, more financial bandwidth. And over a 2-year period, we bought like 50 houses. So we scaled fast and too fast, and it created a lot of problems. But
what would you say the biggest lesson that you learned out of that is?
To go slower. Yeah, to go slower. Part of it is when you move so fast with such a new company, there's things that can happen that you don't anticipate. And any business, regardless of what it is only as good as its people, right? And so, I made a lot of poor hiring decisions that really backfired. Also, I was too quick to get tenants in these properties, and I didn't vet people as well as I should, so I ended up with tenant problems. And then
You're doing all your own property management?
Yeah. We did it through software, though, so we leaned heavily on software.
Sure.
Yeah. But
you didn't contract out the vetting process.
No, we did it through software. Yeah, so we did like tenant screening through software. But even as we did the screening, I was too flexible with people, and it backfired. Yeah, that was an interesting ride too. But that company, definitely had some hurdles. We did a lot in affordable housing as well for the homeless. Okay. So that was very interesting.
Like Section 8.
We did Section 8, or even, working with other nonprofit organizations like Catholic Charities and others that were basically flipping the bill for people that were homeless to come off the streets. So I worked for about 6 years with the homeless and in affordable housing. So that was, that was definitely an eye-opener as well, for sure. Yeah, I got to see, drugs and crime and abuse within the family, just up close and personal, and it was wild. Yeah, it was wild.
So you eventually sold all those houses? You make it sound like this is past tense.
Yeah.
So big portfolio, and then it shrinks again.
Yeah. So I began to. Again, when I started the real estate, I began to get into marketing. So I started a marketing company sort of in tandem with, real estate initially for me was just going to be a part-time, more of a long-term investment. I never pictured it as a way to really pay the bills or be a full-fledged business. Okay. So I started that in tandem with the marketing agency. And as the marketing company began to grow, I began to have less bandwidth with the real estate. And then so I began to scale down on the real estate and literally as of probably 8 months ago, I sold off the last of the properties.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And part of that's just being in California and having properties that are out of state. It's just it can be a little nerve-wracking.
So you lived in Springfield when you were doing all the.
That's why we moved to Missouri, was for real estate investing. Yeah, yeah. So we lived just north of Springfield. So we were there for about 5 years.
So as you scaled that down, what brought you back to California?
Yeah, so living in Missouri, and man, we thought we found our dream home. We had a beautiful ranch and acreage, and it was beautiful.
Goats.
We thought we had goats, and chicken.
I have goats, so I got a soft spot for goats.
I think I had a lot of the same goats you do. You got the Nigerian dwarfs.
Yes,
yeah. Those are my favorite.
And they're having babies, so I'm excited
it's wonderful.
About that.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Yeah, we go to the sale barn auctions on the weekends and buy the animals, and it was fun. It was fun growing your own. We tried to grow our own produce. Didn't do very well at that, but yeah. So we were there, and the real estate market was full swing, and the Lord had put on our heart to plant a church, and so we met another family in the small town. I mean, I say small town. It was like 700 people, small town, and so we partnered with another family that grew up in that town, and we planted a church together. And the Lord really put it on my heart to get more involved in ministry. And I imagine for many years that was pastoral ministry. Yeah. And when COVID hit, it literally decimated the real estate industry. There was a season a few years after COVID where, properties were scarce and it just drove prices up. Yeah. But initially, the whole world froze. I think we all experienced that, right? And so, but when you have an operation that needs to be moving day in and day out, when things freeze for a couple months, it was devastating. So that really shut that whole company down. And then, that really created a season for me to kind of more closely contemplate the pursuit of ministry. And so as my wife and I began to pray what that would look like and where that would be, we sensed that we were to move out of state. And long story short, after much prayer, we decided San Diego was the place to go. Yeah, so we moved here not knowing anybody.
So now I want to know, how did the Lord put on your heart San Diego?
Yeah, so as we began praying through this, again, we really felt a strong urge to move out of state, and both my wife and I, had that feeling. And as we began to talk about it, and we spent several years praying through it, the Lord put a desire in our heart to come back to California, and then it was like, okay, well, if that's the case, where in California? And my wife grew up in LA, as you know, and I spent about a decade in North Hollywood and Glendale in that area. And so we're like, what do you think about coming back to California? And we were both receptive to the idea, but as we continued to pray through it, there seemed some resistance to LA. And the Lord works in mysterious ways. It's hard to really describe, but San Diego was really pressed upon our hearts to move to. And so eventually we just made the decision to sell the house. And
so you didn't know anybody?
Not one person, no. Yeah, we didn't know anybody.
How long before I met you was that?
About a year and a half. We've been here about a year and a half. Okay. Yeah. So, it was tough. I mean, our boys cried when we told them, it's tough. They came from a place where they had a lot of land and they had friends and they had a school, and we love San Diego. We're so thankful to be here, but it was tough at first. It was tough, but it definitely feels like home now, for sure.
That's good. Yeah. That's good. Yeah. California is a big contrast from Missouri.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting to me is, somehow in there you jumped into, I want to run for governor.
Yeah.
Now, I love being around people with motivation to do, big things, big thoughts, big ideas, big things. Yeah. Some people would say, well, that's too big of a thing.
Yeah.
What I wanted to talk to you about was leadership. Yeah. So what is leadership to you? What does that mean to you? What is a good leader? What does leadership look like?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things you could say to answer that. I would say, the litmus test really of a good leader is who follows you, right? Okay. So the ability to attract followers. Now, that doesn't make you a good leader, because there's a lot of people that follow bad leaders, but even good leaders have to have people that follow them. And, even the idea of following, can mean different things. I think that a good leader has the ability to be persuasive, the ability to perhaps convince people to see things your way, and again, that can be used for good or bad. But the marks of a good leader really are the marks that the characteristics that we see in the Lord Jesus Christ, right? So someone who is pursuing what is right, what is godly, what is holy unto the Lord, operating with integrity and honesty, and trying to value others more importantly than yourself. It's those kind of things that we see in Scripture. So those would be a few things that come to mind. I think good leadership too is also somebody who's willing to stay committed to the journey, if you will, even when things get really tough. Somebody who's faithful, and being committed, being faithful, being resolved is easy when things are easy, but faithfulness or lack thereof really shines in how someone responds to the trials of life, I think, too. So yeah, those would be a few things that come to mind.
When you were in San Diego, when you were in Missouri, you were thinking, hey, maybe go into ministry.
Yeah.
Pastoral ministry.
Yeah.
Pastor of a church.
Yeah.
Usually in our society that involves, seminary or something. Yeah. Now, personally, I don't think that's required at all. Right. The requirements for a pastor or an elder would be what you find in,
1 Timothy 3.
1 Timothy 3. If you have those things, it doesn't say anything about, and he has to go to seminary.
Right.
But you were pursuing seminary, I thought, at some point.
Yeah.
Did you get all the way through that, or did you...
I got one class left.
You got one class left?
So I'm in seminary now.
Oh, you're still in it?
Yeah. Okay. Lord willing, I'll be done in May.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so what shifted when you were pursuing, a pastorate to, I'm going to pursue governor?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, so again, going back to Missouri and feeling this call to the ministry, and I think that was really the flame, if you will, for ministry was really fanned during this season of planting a church. So I had come on as an elder during this church plan and watched how the Lord really added to our numbers. Even with a town the size of 700, we swelled to like a church of 50. Now most people see a church of 50, that's nothing. I used to joke with the other elder, and I said, it's 10% of our population. Yeah. So that
imagine what that would be in San Diego.
Right? Yeah, exactly. So I had the ability to preach for the first time, and part of it was, people really gave me a lot of good feedback on preaching, and they acknowledged that I had the gift of preaching, and so there was this confirmation, the different times where people were confirming the call to ministry and my ability to preach and that kind of thing. So that helped kind of move me along in that direction. But as I began to pray through it, again, very early on before we moved out here, and I agree with you, seminary is certainly not a requirement, but having training is. I mean, I think, Paul talks about that the unashamed workman is one who can rightly divide the word of truth, right? So you have to have training in that sense. Now, you don't have to go to seminary to get that training, but for me, I felt that was the Lord's will for me at that time. Now, I had nothing more than a high school diploma, so I'm thinking, okay, Lord, you call me to seminary, but I got to get my undergrad, and then, seminary is obviously graduate level education, and but Andrew, he opened the door for it all, and I came across, we're living in small town Missouri, and even if I wanted to go to there wasn't one. There wasn't a local seminary. And so I began to research more these kind of distance learning programs, and I found that Moody had that. And so I signed on with them, finished my undergrad, and then just decided to continue on with them for graduate.
So how long have you been at this?
5 years, brother. 5 years nonstop of schooling. Yeah.
So undergrad and seminary classes.
Yeah.
You're wrapping up one class left. That's awesome.
One class, and it's Hebrew, so I've really got. I need much prayer.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So then we move out here, and really the the mind of a man plans his ways, but the Lord directs his steps, right?
Yeah. So this has all been remote learning.
It's all been remote. Yeah, I've never stepped foot in an actual.
You could do it from Missouri. You could do it from California.
Yeah, exactly. But it's been good. I mean, I think for somebody who's, people like you and me that are more, maybe perhaps a little more independent, I think the online seminary can work well. But I realize some people are more designed for kind of an in-classroom kind of instruction. But for me, the distance learning worked well, and I've been very thankful for it. Yeah, so we move out here, and to kind of answer your question about that shift. Okay, so I'm thinking, Lord, we're getting closer to ministry, right? We've moved to this place, been praying through it. When we first moved out here, I was a few years away from seminary, so I can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. But I had this, and I'm kind of scaling out of real estate, but I've got this marketing company that year after year is growing, and I'm like, okay, well, if I'm going to go into ministry, something's got to happen to this business. And so long story short, I worked with a business broker and sold it in 2023. So now the business is gone. The real estate is virtually gone, minus a few low maintenance properties at that time. And then seminary is also coming to a close, and I'm like a part-time student now. So I went from this crazy busy schedule to I don't know what to do with my time. It's a terrible feeling, man. I'm telling you, it's a terrible feeling. Yeah. At least for me it was. I didn't know what to do. And so I'm thinking, well, Lord, ministry's coming up soon. And I was talking to, our pastor about some potential, opportunity to become an elder at our church. Yeah. I had also began to meet with other church planters and a few other churches in the area. Right. And there were two concerns that I was immediately confronted with. One was a personal concern. Not that I didn't meet the spiritual qualifications of an elder, but my personality, and when I say my personality, I'm talking about my level of ambition, didn't seem to be like a good fit for the church culture, at least in North County, San Diego. And so I was concerned that even if I was to land a pastoring gig at a church, I would probably meet a lot of resistance in terms of just wanting to be ambitious. And I'm like, I just don't know if that's going to work for me.
Now, this might be a personal question, but I'm just going to ask it anyways. Selling the businesses, going into the pastorate, do you need the money from the pastorate?
No, I wasn't looking for the money.
Okay, so because a lot of, like they say, don't muzzle the ox while threshing, right? So pastors need their compensation. Yeah. They need a way to live, and they're serving the church full time. Yeah. A lot of pastors will work outside. There's a whole, sect of Christianity that will say, no paid pastors whatsoever. Right. I'm assuming the positions that you were looking at would have been paid positions, but you weren't in it for the money.
I wasn't in it for the money, and I didn't really. It's a good question. I didn't even want the money.
Would you have taken a pastorate that said, "Hey, I'll pastor the church, but I won't take any money"?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah. Now I've read different viewpoints on that. I mean, there is a camp, as you just mentioned, that's like, well, whether the pastor needs the money or not, he should take it, because. And I think it's just more of the not necessarily there's like this hard line sort of biblical expectation that pastors must be paid. Obviously, Paul wasn't paid by his own choice, but even Paul would talk about that. The farmer should live off the produce of his labor. He
certainly benefited from people giving him money.
Yeah. But obviously, he was a tent maker, and But anyway, I think that the argument on that side of things is, well, if you're not getting paid, several things can happen. One, the congregation can devalue your ministry because you're not, you're be looked at as like a volunteer, right? And it can create some disunity in the sense, because you think about it, if you have a pastor, especially at a small church, people are contributing financially, and so there's this feeling of connection, right? Like, you're our pastor, you're ministering to us, but we're also ministering to you by giving financially. Well, if you're a pastor and you say, I don't want your money, that can hinder the relationship. I don't know if I really believe that or not, but that's just one.
But see, this plays into precisely what you're talking about. When you come in with a level of energy or motivation, I see an issue in the church of a lack of motivation toward the spiritual things.
Yeah.
People are very busy, or they're happy with status quo or whatever.
Yeah.
What is it that you would have been bringing that people wouldn't be happy with?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's challenging the status quo. Brother, I think a lot of what you're describing boils down to leadership. It boils down to leadership. Ambitious people follow ambitious leaders. Passive people follow passive leaders. It's just the way that it is, right? And so, not that I want to blame every fault of the church on poor leadership, but it's a lot of it. And, we live in a church culture, and I say church culture, I'm talking about, the 21st century Western American church that is largely, at least in my experience, the church has sort of morphed into a spectator sport. I go and do a little mingling, hear a message, and then I repeat that next Sunday, And I'm not saying every Christian operates that way, but in my view, that sort of characterizes the general Christian culture in the West. And so I think it can be hard for a pastor to go into a church and, want to really buck up against that, because part of it's like, well, if I do that, I'm out of a job. And I've got a family to support. And so I think there's a sense of wanting to play along, to get along, But for me, and I think the reason why I was willing to not really bend in that way is because by God's grace, I didn't need the ministry financially.
Right.
So I was willing to be more hardlined in the sense of saying, this is who I am. I am an ambitious person, and if I'm not a fit here, that's okay. But I'm not going to try to not be who I am, so that I can, hope to have a long tenure in this congregation or in this ministry, And I remember one church, and I won't mention the name, but I candidated with them, and sweet people, great people. And afterward, I just had a candid heart-to-heart with one of the elders there, and I said, look, just shoot me straight. Like, my personality, do you think that's a good fit in this place?
Right. Yeah.
And his response was, I've got some concerns. So, yeah, that was probably the biggest reality that made me pause. Even if somebody may need to be motivated or kind of pushed outside the status quo, I didn't really want to be that person, and I don't think that I really would have been welcomed in any place for very long to even be that person. Furthermore, it seems like every place that I went, I wasn't quite perfectly or even close to perfectly theologically aligned. Even in our own church, there's some theological differences that, they're secondary matters, but, when you're on an elder board, you really need to be aligned. And so I kind of had some issues with finding alignment, different places that I went, and
yeah, it's an interesting challenge, I think, that pastors or even aspiring pastors have in America, Western culture.
Yeah.
That the church, and I'm going to use that term very broadly.
Yeah.
The church is very mature, not spiritually mature, but established.
Yeah.
In its ways, in a lot of ways. And you can pretty much, like, I think about the city that we live in, one of the largest metros in the U.S.
Yeah.
We can basically have, and I'm going to use that term very loosely, have any kind of church that we want. And you and I both know, church just is, the Greek word is ekklesia, it's a gathering. So if you're part of a church, you're part of a gathering at the core of it.
Yeah.
So you can have any kind of church that you want. You can have a Baptist church. You can have a Presbyterian church. You can have a Mormon church. You can have a Lutheran church. You can have, Sabbath. You can have any kind of church that you want. But what I mean by mature is that whatever one of those that you kind of go to, it's going to kind of be established unless you're starting a new church.
Yeah.
So you could do a church plant.
Yeah.
And draw, believers that are aligned with, for example, your personality or your theology or whatever.
Yeah.
Hey, we're going to make a new church.
Yeah.
And we're going to start gathering here.
Yeah.
You're going to still run into eventually sort of those, problems that you're talking about. Whether
Sure.
You're going to end up with people who don't agree.
Yeah.
But what's crazy is how people can church hop. It's almost like a smorgasbord. What kind of church do you want today? You can have anything. Part of me thinks that if you look hard enough, you would find a group of people who say, yeah, we're aligned theologically and we're aligned motivationally or personality wise. But again, you're dealing with a problem of what I call maturity, but not maturity in the sense of like spiritual maturity, but just established. Like it's kind of the way it is.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you work through that as a pastor. But
Yeah, I think that's tough, and it's a good observation. And I think that there's to answer that question of why the church hopping, and I think part of it is there's so many churches, and people get frustrated with this thing, and maybe the grass is always green on the other side, kind of thing. But really, two things I've observed is you have the segment of the Christian population that I hate to say it, but they're more interested in being entertained. And so if this church has the better music and the bigger fog machines or whatever, it's they're chasing the event, right? But I think there's another segment of Christians that maybe struggle to find a place because they're longing for more, not more in a secular sense, but they're asking the question, what's my purpose here? Like, I come for fellowship, yes. I come to receive God's word, yes. But there's a burning for something. There's a burning to do something for the Lord, and they're not finding that outlet to exercise the way they've been spiritually gifted, and so they grow restless, frustrated, and they're looking for another place where they can have that. So I think those are the two kind of major camps, and it goes back to what you're talking about challenging the status quo. And in that latter camp of people, if I had to sort of synthesize perhaps what they're feeling, because I've observed this and I felt this even in my own life, is a desire to engage the world collectively for Christ and the gospel. And I think people really long for that. A lot of Christians want to live their lives feeling like I'm doing something to advance the gospel.
It's what we're called to do.
It's what we're called to do, But so much emphasis is on the coming together, and it should be. It should be, but I almost feel like that's almost the exclusive focus. I mean, think about it. What have you been asked about more in your Christian life? Whether or not you came to church on Sunday, or has somebody asked, hey, how's your evangelism going? How many people have you shared Christ with this week? You really don't hear that question much. But if you don't show up one Sunday, somebody might ask, oh, I didn't see you at church on Sunday, right? It gives you a glimpse into the mentality of the church that it's about coming together.
Observation, yeah.
Right. So tying that back into the run for governor. So I began to see these doors close, and there was really no opportunity. And then also not knowing many people here, it wasn't like there was a lot of opportunity that I could access through like networking or relationships of other ministry opportunities.
You're specifically looking for a church in San Diego.
Yeah, in San Diego. Yeah, specifically. Yeah, I never felt like the Lord was calling us outside of San Diego for ministry.
What is it about San Diego? You love the beach, you love the...
I just feel called to be here, yeah. I mean, the beauty of San Diego certainly doesn't hurt, but I just feel called to be here. Like, it just so feels like home, and we've been here nearly 4 years now, and it just hasn't changed. And obviously,
Even with all the politics of California.
even with all the politics of California, I remember before we moved here. I'll tell you this to respond to that. We're in Missouri, and a lot of people have a negative view of Californians. They've never even been to California or even probably even met a Californian. But so we're moving out here, and I met a brother who he didn't go to my church, but nonetheless he was a believer. And he goes, "You moving to California?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Why would you want to move to a place with all those God-hating Democrats?"
Yeah, interesting.
And I thought to myself, "Wow, that is like a very unrealistic stereotype." Okay. But my response to him was this: even if that is true, what a great opportunity for the gospel. Yeah. What a great opportunity for the gospel. And
Anna and I were seriously considering moving out of California.
Sure.
Because our ideology, our perspective, our philosophy, whether it's raising kids or being a Christian or whatever, mostly social issues and surrounding raising a family. Like almost very little alignment with mainstream California thinking. Almost none. So, and especially during COVID. Like I'm telling you, like COVID was insane. That was when I became a proud, self-professing conspiracy theorist. There is no way this thing happens by accident, such a coordinated response around the world. It was crazy. Yeah. I remember being at the park and our kids' play set, just a little local city park, nice little park, wrapped in caution tape.
wow.
The kids' play set was wrapped in caution tape. And I would go outside because I wasn't scared of the outdoors. It was just like a ghost town around. But
I heard that.
you'd go to the park and like, Dad, why is the play set wrapped in caution tape? I'm like, how do you explain that to a child? Like, okay, so there's this thing called coronavirus. People are really scared of it, but it does hurt some people, but for the most part, if you guys were going to catch it, it wouldn't hurt you at all. Most likely, you would probably not even know you were sick. And in fact, we did end up catching COVID at one point. Okay. And I'm telling you, I've been way sicker at other times in my life than that. And the kids, it was like a day or two. It's super easy, But what does this say? I'm looking around. I'm like, people have literally lost their minds. And what some of us parents would do, who actually said, playing on a place that's actually kind of healthy for kids. Doesn't need to be caution. Ooh, stay away. The caution tape would get ripped off. I didn't personally. I really felt like ripping it off. I didn't personally rip it off. I did personally pick it up off the ground and throw it away. But there was a dad there. I was the only one at the park with my kids, and then there was one other dad with one kid, and he was playing on the park, and I got there. And we started small talking, chatting a little, and I was like, hey, so you're outside, you're not worried about it. Well, And so then I mentioned, I thought we were going to have alignment, because no mask, like everybody wore masks. Yeah. I'm down there, no mask. My kids, no mask. Yeah. They didn't have masks on. It was almost like there was the joke, like, oh, you can tell if somebody's sitting in your car wearing a mask with the windows up. Yeah. You don't have to tell us. We know who you're voting for. I said to the dad, I quoted the CDC. I said, it's kind of like the flu for kids. And he stopped. He looked right at me and he started cursing me out. He goes, "You're one of those people." And I was like, wow. Like, what people? I just quoted the CDC website to you. One of those people? Okay, fine. Wow. So-and-so, he tells his kid, "We're leaving." Packed up his kid and left. We were the only ones at the park again. Wow. And I go home, I tell my wife, I'm like, we live in crazy town. Yeah. I cannot, this is insane. Yeah. So we visited Idaho. We were thinking about moving to Idaho. Yeah. Nice place, country. People are normal. We visited. People are normal here. They shop with, Anyways. Yeah. I remember seeing a bumper sticker that said, "Don't Californiate, assimilate." Oh. So they they're like, dude, you want to come from Cal? A lot of people were fleeing California at that time, just fleeing. Yeah. No wonder. Listen to the story I just told. This place is insane.
Yeah.
But there was definitely like, especially people who would have been like, we visited the Coeur d'Alene area, people who would have grown up in Coeur d'Alene and just seen a huge influx of people. Yeah. Like, it was kind of ruining it for the people who had been born there, raised there. Real estate was affordable at one point there. And Californians were selling their houses left and right for massive amounts of money and they could bid prices up. Yeah. You don't think that the people who lived in that town could afford to bid prices up like that. It was money coming from outside. Yeah. Large portion from California, other states too. Yeah. But I felt kind of bad. Like, I almost felt like guilty and, like, well, I don't want to ruin your town. Your town's great. The place I came from is terrible. Yeah. But I would tell people, like, I'm one of you. Like, I agree with you. Like, I think small government, let people live and raise their families, teach them about God, be comfortable walking down the street without a mask on. Yeah. All that's, fine. Yeah. I'm one of you. I don't know if I would have been able to convince people, but there was some point where I realized, like, California, COVID kind of blew over. It took a long time, kind of blew over. And I think it woke a lot of people up, a lot of people who did not even wonder about these things. Like, I started wondering about all kinds of stuff. Like, okay, what about COVID? What about 9/11? What about the JFK? Well, started like really kind of learning about, there's bigger strings being pulled at the government level and the societal level, if you want to call it the deep state or whatever, that, is kind of forcing the world into these types of situations. Our family is here in California. I'm born and raised here. Yeah. And I ended up just buying a house here because we were renting for a while because we were thinking, we might move out of state. We might be forced out. Yeah, yeah. And then I came to the conclusion that even if it's like goes full commie, which a lot of people in the rest of the country, like, they'd be like, oh yeah, like your buddy said. Yeah. It's a ministry opportunity. Yeah. Like, most missionaries would have to travel to a communist country to do communist level, suppressed government and suppressed evangelistic work. Yeah. And if California goes that way and I'm here, well, I didn't have to travel anywhere. I'm now a missionary in a communist, state or country if California secedes. So I'm still here. But you're here, it sounds like, for similar reasons, like, hey, we're not going anywhere. This is our home. Yeah, yeah. But the place is kind of, I don't know, going really bad. At least in the last 10 to 15 years. Yeah. Like 10, 15 years ago, we voted that marriage was between a man and a woman. Yeah. Well, that got overturned by the courts. Yeah. Okay, so the voters don't have... And then more recently, we voted that the people in California voted to embed same-sex marriage into the Constitution and abortion rights. Yeah. So these issues, it's like, wow, okay, we're losing. Yeah. We're literally losing. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, the Lord calls people different places, different seasons. As it relates to leaving California, I get it. We left. My wife and I left. We got married, and a year later we left for reasons many families do. We couldn't afford it. I was a young entrepreneur, and we're living in Glendale, run-down, 2-bedroom apartment with a newborn. And when I began to look at the numbers, and she had some family that had moved to Texas in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we realized that we could build a brand new, beautiful 4-bedroom house and have a mortgage payment that was $300 a month less than our rent payment on this old, run-down, small 2-bedroom apartment. That's hard to turn down, especially when you're at that season of life. I get why people leave, and that's just the cost element. Forget the crime and the homelessness and the politics and all those other reasons. The cost is often enough. We've left, but in this season, I believe that the Lord has called us here to stay, to fight, to fight for what's right for other Californians and for this state. So what do I think of it? Yeah, there's a lot that needs to be fixed. There's a lot of families that are hurting. Yes, I mean that's what I think. But I believe that the solution ultimately is God needs to fix anything. But on a human level, it becomes possible when people unite, right? And so that kind of ties into the run for public office. But there are a lot of Californians that want change, like big, real change. I think these fires in LA have only further kind of opened people's eyes to the reality of these oppressive policies, and it's perhaps softened their hearts and made them more open to another perspective. So I think there's a shift that's happening in California that we haven't seen in a long time.
A shift to what?
A shift to reimagine what's possible in California. A shift to have policies that allow this state to work for the average person. And I think the wildfires have done that. I think that what we saw with the last presidential election with, not that I really want to put everything in the camp of Democrat and Republican, but we saw 10 counties go from blue to red. You have 1/3 of the California voter base that are looking for something better, right? That's a large portion of the voter base, and so I think there's a shift. People want better, they need better, and they're open to a new perspective. Yeah.
What is that new perspective, though? So you kind of heard like a really low level, hey, dad with his kids at the park experience. That's something that I'm looking for. You have a massive amount of liberals, but you also have quite a few conservatives. When we say conservative, we're talking about conserving something.
Yeah.
I'm personally interested in conserving the family. So what is it like? What are the core tenets that you're thinking that the shift is to? Like, you think a majority of people in California are shifting back to, hey, the traditional family's a little more important than we thought? Or what is that shift?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. People are seeing their everyday lives become increasingly oppressive, right? So what are they looking for? What's that shift? People want less crime, right? They want to see less homeless people on the streets. They want to see costs come down. They want to see more affordable housing.
So just to push back, did they want to see more crime before? They wanted to see more homelessness? Normally everybody would say, we all want that. Yeah, that's what we all want.
Sure. But things elevate to a certain level, and at a certain level, people go beyond just, I'd like things to be better, to where things must get better. I'll give you an example. In December of last year, Prop 36 was passed, right? And so Prop 36 undid a lot of what Prop 47 put in place. Prop 47 has been around for over a decade. What Prop 47 essentially did was allow criminals to be criminals, right? They could go and they could steal and virtually nothing would happen to them. It reduced a lot of drug and crime offenses to misdemeanors. So these kinds of crimes were just book and release. They might get booked, but it was a misdemeanor and they were back out on the streets in 2 hours. Okay, so the people of California got to a point where they say enough's enough. Enough's enough. They had it. They were tired of being vandalized and burglarized. And so they band together and they essentially launched Prop 36, what became known as Prop 36, which became law in December of last year. Here's the point, is that the state legislature, and specifically Gavin Newsom, was against Prop 36. But the people rose up and said enough's enough, and it became law because 70% of the state wanted it to be law. Now you could say, well, prior to Prop 36, did they not care about crime? No, but it hadn't got to a level to where the pain, the oppression was enough for people to say, okay, we're going to come together and take action. And so I think, as it relates to crime and homelessness and costs, I think that people, they've gotten up to here with it, and they want change, and they're ready to make change happen. So that's
through like a proposition that the voters can vote on.
Well, I think, and that's the whole point. I don't think a lot of people know, right? They're feeling the frustration. They want to see change happen. Many people are willing to be part of that change, but they don't know how. They don't have the means to do that.
Okay, so educate me on Prop 36. Did Gavin Newsom have to sign it, or how does it become law without the governor signing the bill or whatever?
Yeah, so California has a form of direct democracy where the residents can push to have new laws created or laws repealed or laws altered, and it's done through a process known as a ballot measure, right? Now you have to get X number of signatures, and then there is a process. And the
governor has no impact over that. Like he can't veto it or anything
if the push is strong enough, which in this case it was, even though Governor Newsom was against it, it still became law anyway. So yes, I mean there is a sense in which the governor can push back, but this is the will of the people, and they got it through, But I think that's where people are at, not just with crime, but with costs and homelessness.
Do you think they'd go back to the marriage issue? You know how we voted that marriage was between a man and a woman? This was 10, 15 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
Somehow the courts overturned it. I don't know the details, but it's like, sorry, yeah, we know you voted, but that didn't matter.
Yeah, I would like to think so. I don't have enough data on that particular issue to know, but what's interesting is that in the state constitution, it still says that marriage is between a man and a woman. They haven't changed the language of the Constitution, even though the law's been changed.
They're trying to, though, right?
They're trying to, but it's one of ththose interesting things where the law's been changed, but the Constitution still says that marriage is between a man and a woman. I'd like to think so.
Why do you think California is so far left? Like they say that California leads the nation in weirdness, or messed up policies or whatever.
Yeah.
What is it? It's a beautiful state, a huge economy. What's the?
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's obviously ultimately it boils down to sin. You and I know that, but you've got some very highly influential elements like the film industry, Hollywood.
Also the tech industry.
A lot of the pornography that makes its way on the internet comes out of Hollywood. Having been in the entertainment industry myself for a decade, I mean, it is a dark, dark, dark world. And so, with the entertainment industry, with the hub of that being in California, I think that influences a lot of the culture. But yeah, I believe that California can be restored. I believe that people want change, and I believe that on a human level, it happens when people come together and unite to make change happen. It's like we saw with Prop 36, and that's the whole reason why I've launched the Restore California movement, to bring about that kind of unity.
What would you be changing it to? Like, how do you actually solve homelessness?
Yeah, so first of all, the Restore California movement addresses 7 key issues, homelessness obviously being one of them.
What are the other 6?
Well, you've got crime, you've got affordable housing, we're dealing with homelessness, issues related to the environment, public education, healthcare. So, these are statistically the 7 main issues that Californians are concerned about. Okay. Now, the Restore California movement isn't limited to those issues, but that's just the pillars, so to speak, that the movement is focused on. But
so pick that one pillar, homelessness.
Yeah.
I'll ask you about education next, but how do you solve it?
Well, I think with any problem, you have to really take a step back and ask, okay, what is really contributing to this problem, right? You can't really solve a problem if you don't really know exactly what the problem is. Now, when you hear other politicians, especially people that are running for this same office, because they're asked that question a lot, like, what would you do about homelessness? I've never heard any one of them give any kind of a real compelling answer. What you'll typically hear is that, well, we need to address mental health and drug addiction. And yes, we do, no doubt. But mental health and drug addiction are are symptoms of a deeper rooted issue, right? So if all you focus on is mental health and drug addiction, it's really a Band-Aid solution, not really addressing the core issue. You say, well, what's the core issue? It's the breakdown of the family. So you mentioned family. In fact, when you look statistically, 85% of young males that are incarcerated in California come from single-parent households. And a lot of inmates, when they come out of prison, end up on the streets because most companies won't hire felons or even people that have, a noticeable criminal background. So these issues sort of intertwine. But really what it comes down to is a breakdown of the family. I've heard people say, like, boy, I can't, you see people on the streets and it's like, I can't imagine my loved one being on the streets. Well, that should raise a question in someone's mind, like, where are these people's loved ones? That they're allowing to have their loved one live on the streets. What I learned in being in homelessness and affordable housing is that the issue with the family, when the families are broken down, you have multiple generations that get caught up in drug addiction, even prostitution, and then that leads, of course, to mental health. So oftentimes when people are on the streets, not always, but oftentimes they have no support system. It's been decimated. And so they literally have nowhere to turn but to the streets and to beg for some kind of government assistance or whatever. So the problem is the breakdown of the family. So whatever the solution is, it has to include restoring the family unit, right? Because even if you address drug addiction and mental health, well, if people don't have an accountable family-like structure to return to, they're just going to go back out on the streets. And I witnessed this in Missouri, working with the homeless, sitting in their living room, talking to them about their struggles. And man, here's what I learned is that you can take somebody from the streets and you can give them the services they need, so to speak, to get back on their feet, the mental health treatment, drug treatment. They can even be given free food. The government can pay for their rent. Okay, I've been the recipient of rent that's come from the government on behalf of somebody who's homeless. In 6 months, 90% of them will be right back out on the street. Because what happens is, you got to understand, these people are accustomed to living in that kind of environment. And when you put them behind closed doors, all that happens is they bring the environment from the street behind closed doors. And that's what we've seen in California. There's two major quasi-plans that have been rolled out to address homelessness. One's called Project Room Key, where the government has spent billions of dollars to buy like motels and renovate them for the homeless. And then there's No Place Like Home. So both of these solutions, if you will, over $20 billion has been poured into them, but homelessness keeps rising because it's a half-baked plan. People get moved off the street and then they just move right back out on the street because they haven't addressed the core issue, which is the family. So what's my plan? Well, we have to restore the family. Here's how you do that to the best that you can. First of all, you can't allow people to live on the street. You have to outlaw encampments. You have to outlaw homelessness in that sense. And so you have to undo a lot of the laws and regulations that allow people to be homeless. In Los Angeles, for instance, law enforcement can do virtually if somebody wants to put up a tent on a sidewalk outside of your house, they can do it. And they can set up their little charcoal grill and they can do what they want to do. Law enforcement is virtually hamstrung to do anything. So there's these laws in place that allow people to be homeless. You have to undo those regulations. You also have to get rid of the subsidies and all of the free giveaways that really enable people to be homeless. In fact, statistically, 20% of people that are homeless have actually turned down legitimate work opportunities because they receive more money from the government than they would if they went to get a job. So you have these policies that are in place that actually enable people to be homeless. About 1/3 of the homeless population doesn't need to be homeless. They're just incentivized to be homeless. So if you outlawed homelessness,
You think it's only 1/3?
It's 30 to 40% statistically. So if you got rid of all those freebies and actually force people to go get a job and become a productive member of society, you would kill 1/3 of the problem right there.
So you're talking about outlawing homelessness.
Yeah, people should not be allowed. I mean, a lot of places in North County, San Diego, I mean, I've seen it. Carlsbad's one example. I mean, if somebody's just, even kind of loitering, and they are, showing signs that they're probably going to sleep there that night, man, the cops show up. They don't tolerate it. Even in areas of Los Angeles County where, most of the homeless individuals in California live, over 90%, there's certain sections of the greater LA area, like Burbank, you're not going to see homeless people. I mean, maybe very rarely, but not like you would see in Skid Row.
Is it because it's outlawed, or?
They don't tolerate it. They don't tolerate it.
In Oceanside, my hometown, along the riverbed, there's full encampments being created, and it got worse and worse. Well, we lived in Oceanside for 5 years. We moved back east towards the country where you don't see this.
Right.
But riding by riding our bikes with the kids, a total bonfire with smoke. I'm like, oh, the riverbed's on fire. No, it's just the homeless encampment. They've got fire. Like, that can't be legal. They have a fire down in the trees in the river. There's a sign that says no trespassing along the riverbed.
Yeah. Yeah.
The authorities have to know about it.
Oh, sure, yeah. They can't do anything. And so you have, like, Jones versus the city of Los Angeles that passed, I think, in 2006. That basically prohibited police officers from really removing people from the streets. I mean, and so it just gets taken over by these encampments.
So focusing on the solution, though, you're talking about the breakdown of the family is the root cause.
Yeah.
So first of all, you outlaw homelessness. So in a sense, you're de-incentivizing living on the streets. You're incentivizing families to stay together?
Well, yeah, so I'll get to the family portion. So you outlaw homelessness. You don't allow people to live on the streets. Now the question is, okay, well, where do you put them? I'll get to that in a second. But you have to get rid of these policies, whatever enables people to live on the streets, these policies that are in place, you have to undo those. And again, by doing so, you're gonna solve 30% of the problem, because statistically, about 1 out of 3 homeless people, they're of sound mind, they can go get a job, they're incentivized not to. Now, you have a portion of the homeless population also that, they're significantly mentally ill. That's about another 3%. Right? You see that, right? People walking down the streets and they're screaming and talking to themselves. Yeah. There's currently no policy in place for people to be forced into mental health treatment. So they're just allowed to roam the streets and be crazy. That is not compassion. That is not good for them, and it's not good for anyone else. Mm-hmm. So we have to compassionately require people that are significantly mentally ill to get the help that they need. And I realize that there needs to be a delicate, compassionate way that we do that, but it must be a requirement. They can't just be allowed to roam the streets battling with these significant mental health issues. So we have to get them off the streets into the treatment that they need. Now, when people come off the streets, what I'm proposing is, okay, we need to get them into 90-day temporary shelters. But we're not going to, unnecessarily use taxpayer funds to erect these structures for the homeless. We're going to partner with the private sector, right? So you've got businesses that maybe have unused warehouse or industrial spaces that the government could rent from business owners, right, which would further help the economy. And then we're going to bring in like portable restrooms and kitchens and that kind of thing. It's a 90-day temporary shelter where people are going to get cleaned up. There's going to be opportunities for them to learn perhaps a trade. And this is where the family part comes in, helping them reunite with family members. So if they have family members and they can be reunited to them, and it's a healthy, supportive, and accountable environment, we definitely want to encourage people to reunite with their biological family. So that's part of that 90-day period. Also, if you have people that they have warrants out for their arrest or they're criminals, we need to identify that as well. So that's what that 90-day period is designed to do. It's the first step to getting people either back on their feet, or if they need to be incarcerated, if they have warrants out, or if they can be reunited with their families, getting job training. That will be part of that as well. We also want to engage volunteers. Part of my plan is actually incentivizing the community and small businesses to get involved by offering tax credits and things like that. The answer can't just be, well, it's the government's job to solve it. There has to be this uniting of the public and private sector. Beyond the 90 days, for those people that don't need to have long-term mental health treatment or drug addiction treatment, or they haven't been reunited with family, we want to get them into more longer-term living arrangements. So going back to my experience as a real estate investor, I worked with many homeless people. They come off the streets, they get the free rent, they get the free food, and they go right back out on the streets for reasons I've already described. But then I came across an organization called Oxford House. And it was unbelievable what I experienced. What Oxford House did, they didn't use $1 of taxpayer funds. They rent larger houses from real estate investors, and then they turn around and they rent rooms out to men and women who are trying to get back on their feet. So these are people that are either coming out of prison, coming off the streets, they're gainfully employed, and they can rent, a room that they can afford, and there's rules. They have to, they can't drink. They can't do drugs. They can't even have someone of the opposite sex over at their room overnight. There's a house government structure with a president and a treasurer and a vice president. So I'll tell you a quick story. I'm renting this house out to Oxford House, and I'm only about a year into renting with them, and the rent's coming in, and it's just going so smoothly. But I never actually went into one of the houses after I rented to them. I get a rent check in the mail one day, and they forgot to sign it. And so I called my contact at Oxford House. I say, hey, I got the rent check, but it's just no signature, and I'll just send it back. He sent me another check. And or he said, just send it back and I'll send you another check. And I said, well, you know what? Now that I think about it, I'm only like a mile from the house. Why don't I just go to the house and they can cut me a check? And in my mind, I'm thinking, then I can see the house. So I go up to the house, I knock on the door. Now granted, this house, the 12 men that live there, most of them have come out of federal prison. Okay. So I'm like...
You had 12 men living there? How many rooms was it?
It was a big house. Yeah, but they're not just renting rooms. Like they might convert like a large family room with multiple beds,
Okay.
So yeah,
okay.
You've got...
This is like a 5-bedroom house or...
Something like that. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Guy comes to the door, and I explain the situation, need the signature on the check. He's like, oh yeah, no problem. He goes, I'm not the guy that signs the checks. I need to go get him, but why don't you come in? And I said, great. I walk into this house. Andrew, it was spotless. Spotless. There's 12 dudes that live here. The carpet still had the vacuum lines for when they vacuumed the carpet. Wow. They had this nice TV on low volume, lights that were kind of dimly lit, and it blew my mind. Here you have 12 men that were probably homeless at some point, probably spent time in federal prison, and this house was so well managed that it blew me away. Because the secret sauce for them was you gave people a structure by which they could truly change their lives. Not only a job, but an opportunity to be among their peers, other people they can relate to, that are going to hold them accountable, and it was like a family. It was like a family. That is what's missing. And so that kind of housing model doesn't cost taxpayers anything. These guys are working, they're paying their own rent, and they're thriving. And but you're partnering, you have the government that's partnering with the private sector, and it's a beautiful thing. And so that generally...
What's the partnership part of the government? Because they're working, they're paying...
Yeah. So when I say partnership, I'm not talking about the government actually providing funds, but the government, working with these kinds of organizations to help facilitate getting people into these houses and into these kind of more permanent...
So logistically helping, or
logistically partnering, right?
Enforcing it, saying,
yeah.
hey.
So you've got people in these temporary shelters, and you have some people that they're cleaned up, and they don't need any further drug or mental health treatment, or even if they do, if they're gainfully employed, then they can go into one of these kinds of permanent housing. Yeah.
So where are you going to find these houses? Because houses are kind of scarce in California.
Yeah, well, that's why we need to engage with the private sector. Yeah. So like organizations like Oxford House would do all of the legwork in identifying, property owners that are looking to rent out larger properties.
But for example, you were telling me, before we got on, that even looking for a rental, and I've done this too.
Yeah. It's
hard to find.
Yeah.
They're expensive.
Yeah.
Not that many.
Right. Well, and see, that's why all these issues, are interconnected, right? So we also have to address, housing. and how do we increase housing development and those kinds of things, because there is a scarcity of housing.
What's the number one biggest reason for the housing shortage in California?
Well, I would say that probably the biggest reason, not just for housing, but for many of the issues that plague our state, is environmentalism that's gotten out of control. Yeah, environmentalism.
So you don't care about the environment?
Right, that's the pushback, right? But you've got so many environmental regulations and assessments that, look at these houses that all these in LA County and the Palisades that just decimated because of these fires. It's going to take these people, 2 years or more just to get the assessments done and the permits approved, just to start rebuilding. So when you're a developer or you're somebody who's just trying to invest in the real estate market, and you're dealing with new construction, it's not worth it. They're going to go elsewhere where they can actually get things done and they can sell.
Is that from the state level or the county level, or both?
Well, I think both. You have, California is controlled to a large extent by special interest groups, and it's not that I'm against environmentalism, but it needs to be scaled back. It's gotten so out of control that these regulations that have been put in place to allegedly help people are actually oppressing people. I believe a lot of the reasons why the LA fires got so out of hand because of the lack of water. There's upwards of several millions of gallons of water every day dumped into the Pacific Ocean to allegedly protect a small fish. It's just, yeah. So all these issues are interconnected. So you can't silo it out and say, well, we're going to just focus on homelessness or any other issue only. These issues have to be addressed collectively.
On the broken family topic, I was telling you that I listened to Nick Freitas. He's a Virginia House of Delegates member. So he deals with, issues in and around near DC often, but he was identifying that the family courts are partially, significantly responsible for broken families. Because what happens is they incentivize the family to break up. They incentivize a woman to say, yeah, I don't like him, so I'm gone, and he has to pay me 50% of his income for the rest of his life. Yeah. That incentivizes, broken families.
Yeah.
What do you see there in the court system that is also contributing to this issue, and what could we do about it?
Well, it boils down to leadership. It really does. We can't change the hearts of people. If you have people that are in leadership in the court system or anywhere else, and they are helping to promote a breakdown of the family, obviously we need to pray for them. But Christians especially, and even for people who aren't Christians but value family, and there's a lot of those people too. We need to rise. We need to rise and pursue those kinds of positions to change the course of things. And this goes back kind of to what we were talking about earlier. Is now is not the time to be passive. Now is the time to be active and to lead. And not that leadership has to come in a political realm, but it is time for the people of God and for people who value family to stand up and rise, and to be bold and to be courageous and to prayerfully consider, what can I actively do to make these kinds of changes happen?
Is that the second piece of how you decided to run for governor? I've asked you this question before. Wait, why not some position in San Diego or a county position or
city
or something?
I've been asked that. Yeah,
you jumped all the way to the. California is the 6th largest economy.
Fifth.
Yeah. Okay, 5th largest economy in the world.
Yeah.
If it was a country, it'd be the 5th largest.
Yeah.
So that's 5 steps below just president of the United States. How did you come to that?
Yeah, so just in summary, as the doors were closing with ministry, and I was prayerfully, I'm in this season where it's like, okay, sold the business, got a lot of time, ministry doors were closing, and so I began to consider a number of things. Like there was this willingness to do something that was bold. I began to consider my 20 years in business and the different things that I've done, like working in affordable housing, balancing budgets, bringing people together, especially on the marketing side, bringing people together that oftentimes didn't agree to make things happen. And also being someone who had personally experienced a lot of these oppressive policies in California, seeing my kids go to public school and having to pull them out because they're getting exposed to porn and classroom sizes that are so large because of teacher shortages, they can't get the help they need. Starting 2 businesses in California and dealing with ridiculous fees and high payroll taxes, and being on the receiving end of these oppressive policies. And then also having the business background that, in my view, really aligned well with what the governor is responsible for. And, but yeah, so why governor and not some more local office? Because the governor of California, regardless of who he or she is, has the ability to actually make change happen. Somebody who's a Republican, who's in Congress or the Senate, and God bless them, they can fight, but they're dealing with a supermajority that are Democrats, and they're probably not going to, realistically make any kind of change happen. But the governor can. The governor can do things like line item vetoes. He can halt things. He has a strong amount of influence and the ability to make executive orders.
Will you do that?
Executive orders?
Will you do executive orders, halting things?
Sure.
Aligned with your principles.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the ability, even as a Republican, being governor in a state that currently is largely led by Democrats, I would still have the ability to deliver change.
So you're running as Republican.
I'm running as a Republican. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're going to be first up against the primaries. All the other people in the Republican Party running as Republican. You got to get over that hurdle.
Right. Yeah.
And then face a super majority of, Democrat, liberal voters. I would say, it's been a long time since we've had a Republican.
Yeah, 20 years. Yeah. But I believe the people of California are looking for change. And I believe that the answer, again, is not one person saying, hey, I'm going to come in and fix this place, but it really has to do with uniting the people of California, which is why that I'm running in tandem with a movement, Restore California, that's designed to bring people together. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
Restoring California is not an easy task, probably, and your definition of Restore California might be different than some others that
sure
maybe the environment issues are more important or whatever.
Yeah.
Right now, we've got the governor paying people to bring, their babies here to abort them. We've got same-sex marriage being embedded into our Constitution or whatever. Some pretty major culturally leading in the wrong direction issues.
Yeah.
And I am more than happy to see it turn around. My heart goes out to you because the amount of opposition that this, I was joking around earlier, we're in communist California. That's not too far off. Sometimes we joke too, well, it's a free country, but in California, it's not really. I can't tell you how many laws I break all the time. It's like, yeah, that's not really legal, but most people in a free country would think, oh yeah, you could do that if you wanted to. In California, the regulation is just insane, and as well, the cultural bent is. One of my biggest contributions right now, and you know me pretty well, is to raise a family.
You bet.
That grows up. I have 5 boys, 1 girl. I want them to grow up just thinking and knowing that this is right.
Yeah.
structure of the family,
Yeah.
worship of God.
Yeah.
This is right. I watched the the first Trump cabinet meeting.
Yeah.
He had a minister pray, and I told him, I was like, it sounded like we were in church.
Oh, yeah.
Like the first cabinet meeting.
Yeah.
Would you see bringing something like that into the governor's office, where you'd open your first cabinet meeting with a minister praying that, hey, Lord, you don't appoint power unless it's from your hand, and
Yeah, and that's really what it boils down to, is that politically this provides a platform, right, to represent Christ, right? And
would you turn the government into a church, though?
no. But the government's established by God, right? And the government's role, if you were to summarize it, is to uphold a biblical standard of righteousness. And so in that sense, it provides a platform to do that. Obviously, not everybody who has that platform does that, but that's what it's there for. But I think, brother, I believe strongly that if the people of God and those who align themselves even just with biblical values rise up, we can make change happen. The issue is that largely the church hasn't made its way into the world effectively. Let me tell you what I've experienced just running for office a few weeks. The amount of hate that's coming at me on social media. I mean, I've been called everything under the sun. And people are saying these things just by seeing a 20-second ad that's just me saying that I'm running for governor and I'm a Christian and I'm a Republican and I want to reduce crime and improve our schools. I mean, that's what they're basing their hate on. But I ask myself this question. I'm getting all this hate. I mean, I can go on Instagram and different social media channels, YouTube, and it's just filled up every day. Just based on a 20-second ad clip. People don't even know me beyond that. Yet I can go to church every Sunday. I don't see people outside protesting. I don't see people coming into the church doors trying to shut us down. And it's made me realize even more clearly running for office that just by bringing the message of Christ a little bit into the world, create the opposition and the hostilities there. But the church, in large part, has not brought its message into the world to elicit that kind of opposition. And so we can operate peacefully, right? But the world, not that we're seeking hostility or seeking opposition, but the world needs to see people standing up for what is right.
Yeah. For the truth.
For the truth. And that's how you change the culture. That's the opportunity. Right? That's the opportunity. And that's in large part why I'm running and why I'm running in tandem with the Restore California movement, to give people a forum, a platform to take that kind of action.
I would love to explore more of the actual policies at some point, but we've been going here for a while. I could talk to you all night. It's pretty interesting stuff. At least to me. I ask you about what I'm interested in, and you're touching on some very deep topics, like the topic of why does the church in America not suffer as much persecution as you might think some other countries where they would, or historically how the church has suffered. And I'm not saying the church should be looking for persecution, because Jesus said that if you love me, if you keep my commands, if you follow me, the world, don't be surprised when the world hates you.
Right.
But there's so many Christians nowadays that I think the world doesn't really hate. They're kind of comfortable with them. They're nice. They're nice people. They're friends.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wonder, I'm not even bold enough. And it's not that I'm saying, we should be bold to elicit persecution or hate.
Yeah.
But if you stand up for what's true and what's right, the world definitely hates that.
Sure.
Let me make that clear.
Yeah.
But are you getting hate from the Democrat side or the liberal side or even people, Republicans?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know these people. I just see their one-off comments. But the world that is against Christ, the world that is against Scripture, in my view, doesn't feel threatened by the church. You know.
Interesting.
And
you think they should?
I think they should feel threatened by the church for the right reasons, right? Not that the church should go and wish harm on the world, but when the light comes into the darkness doesn't want the light, right? And so the world should feel threatened by the church lovingly going into the world and presenting Christ. That's what I'm talking about. So I long for that day. And so in summary, I see politics as a platform, yes, for me to legitimately represent the people of California politically, but even above and beyond that, to provide a platform for other people to stand up and say, hey, we also believe that these things are right, and we want to come alongside and see these kinds of changes happen. Yeah.
So your family's down for the fight?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we're all kind of feeling that knot in our throat. It's obviously a big thing. It's a big risk, but yeah, we're definitely united on it.
I just love this, just living at the edge of like, all the way up to governor, and it's been a privilege to just, spend this time talking to you.
Thank you, brother. Yeah, thank you.
I would be thrilled if you were the governor.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah.
But we'll see what the Lord does.
Yeah, we'll see what He does.
I think you're, obviously believe that God has a purpose and a plan, and whatever that is, it may be success, it may not be, in terms of, winning the governorship.
Yeah.
There's a lot of big fights, I think, probably ahead. I don't know everything about politics. I just know it's a nasty.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm getting a taste of that.
I'll be praying for you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I definitely need prayer. But yeah, thanks for having me on. And
no problem.
This has been a joy.
Thanks. Yeah. We'll do it again if it's helpful.
Let's do it.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right, man. You bet. You bet.
What a great conversation. I'm so thankful for the ambition of my friend Brandon Jones and what he is seeking to do in running for governor. I think that California needs a lot of help, and definitely am very intrigued by some of his ideas. For example, making homelessness illegal. Imagine that. There's a lot of other things I think should probably be illegal, and I would have loved to dive into so many more of the issues facing our state and our society as a whole. We have a big societal shift right now with Trump being the president and doing things like saying, hey, no men in women's sports and things like that. It's really good. And then cutting some of the government waste. There's some pain that goes along with that, but certainly if we can do some of those same things in California, it'll be helpful, I think. And I love this state. I've grown up here, and I love the ambition of my friend. This is really amazing. My prayers are with him, and I think it'll be very interesting to learn more about his policies and about the campaign and the efforts there. If you want to learn more, I forgot to ask him how people can learn more, but certainly I have the info. You can go to Restore California, at Restore California on YouTube. That's where he does all his videos, and he posts a lot of really good information and policy positions there. You can also go to restoreca.org and learn more about the campaign there if you want to learn more. And a big thanks to Brandon for sitting down with me and really sharing his heart, really a spiritual side to this that kind of developed over time, and I hope you have found it really helpful. So that's it for today's episode, and I will see you on the next one. Now that you know more, go out and grow more.
All content on The Whole Steward is for informational purposes only and must not be considered personal, professional, tax, or legal advice. Please consult an appropriate professional for individualized advice. Though we do our best to bring you reliable information, we make no guarantee on its accuracy, so you must rely on your own due diligence to draw your own conclusions. The views expressed by guests on the show are their own and may not represent that of the host. Please visit our website for complete terms and conditions.
Thanks for joining us today for the holistic approach to wealth from a Christian worldview. This show is brought to you by thewholesteward.com.